Ladies and gentlemen, buen dia, good morning. It's 9:10, so it's high time to start our convention. And before I leave the floor to the president of Eurotex and the president of ATP for doing the official opening and welcome, I would simply like to share some practical information with all of you on the program, on how we will be organizing ourselves for the rest of the day, so that you're all fully aware and that you can all fully benefit from being together here. My name is Dirk van Tichem. I'm the Director General of Eurotex, and also for me personally, it's a great pleasure to be here in Porto. So again, just to make sure we're all tuned in on what will happen today, my first advice or my first request is that you all follow the program on this app, on this application that you have on your smartphone, WOVA. All of you that have registered for the program should have it on your smartphone, WHOVA. If you go to that app, you will find all the details of our program for today and tomorrow. So we are working paperless, being sustainable. So all the information that you will on the program, speakers, the participants, there is even a little feature to connect, to look for participants, colleagues in the conference. You can connect through the app. So all the practical information, we may put announcements on this app. So please, if you haven't downloaded the application, please do it now, because again, we will be sharing some information. We may even launch some questionnaires, surveys, everything through this WOVA app. So please make sure you have downloaded it and you follow everything that is being announced there. On the program itself, very briefly, as I said, you've seen the title. It's all about sustainability and competitiveness for the European textile industry. The way we will organize our day is that we will have the official welcome, as I said, from the two hosting organizations, Eurotex and ATP. So our two presidents will be addressing with a short keynote, sharing their perspectives, their views on the future of our industry. After that, we will have a keynote speaker, somebody with a both interesting political and economic business background, Mr. César Vieiro, but Mario Jorge will introduce him in more detail. So looking forward to have his insights, his kind of broader perspective on what is happening around us. And as we all know, there is a lot happening around us. And after this session, we'll have a first coffee break, giving you the opportunity to network, because also this convention, like any other conference, is also about giving you the opportunity to meet colleagues, to discuss, maybe even to do some business, who knows. So we'll have that coffee break just outside here. And after that, we have organized, as you probably have seen on the program, we have organized two, what we call CEO panels. So two discussion sessions, each time with 4 representatives from the industry. And we try to really have, I would say, a good balance in terms of countries, in terms of textile backgrounds, brands, manufacturers. So two panels that will discuss, the first one that will discuss, when talking about sustainability, how do we actually measure sustainability? A very, very important, difficult question. And how do we communicate about sustainability? Greenwashing, what is really green? So that will be the first panel discussion. And then the second discussion will focus on, I would say, the financial side of sustainability. So can we afford being sustainable? Sustainable textile products tend to be more expensive, maybe, in the short term. So how can we reconcile financial sustainability and environmental sustainability? Again, an important topic that many entrepreneurs here in the room are facing. So the idea of those two panels is really to listen to some testimonials, some experiences, but certainly also to reach out to you as representatives of the European and more global textile industry. So we've instructed our two moderators to really also try to involve the public, the audience, really share your ideas, your questions, your proposals on these two broad topics. Then we'll have a good lunch. Walking lunch will be just outside, again, in the outside the room. And then in the afternoon, we have scheduled, as you have seen, 4 workshops, we call it, going a little bit more technical, going a little bit more, I would say, into the specifics of 4 topics that we have chosen, which fit within this broad, discussion on sustainability and competitiveness. There will be 2 workshops running in parallel, so you will need to choose one or the other. And the first 2 sessions will be on the EPR system, the Extended Producer Responsibility. I don't know if you are aware of this concept. If you're not, you should go to the workshop, because it's very important what is coming. The second one will be focusing on the digital product passport, which is another very important element of the European textile strategy. Also there, I know you can't split yourself in 2, but both, I think, are very important topics. The first one, EPR, will be held here. The second one, on the product passport, will be held in the room just next door, Guimarães 2, it is called. After that, we will continue with 2 further workshops. One will focus on textile recycling. Again, a very big topic, textile waste recycling. How do we manage? How do we organize ourselves? What are the technologies? What is happening in that area? And then the fourth one will be on what we called textile labeling. That's very much about trying to establish a benchmark, a standard. What is now the environmental footprint of textile products? Again, some of you are maybe familiar with the product environmental footprint concept, the PEF, the famous PEF, I should say the notorious PEF, maybe, for some. So in that workshop, again, we will listen to some experience and invite you to participate in the discussions. For each of those 4 workshops, we on purpose did not have a long list of speakers. We will have 1 moderator and 1 kind of impulse speaker statement, because the main focus, again, is to bring you, to allow you, to participate in those discussions. So the idea is really to have a first presentation from a technical expert on PEF, on EPR, etc., and then really engage with you as representatives of the industry to answer your questions, to understand your concerns, your proposals, etc. I know, I come back to my WOVA app. You should go to the app and indicate which of those workshops you would like to join. If you go to the program in the app, you can see all these 4 workshops, and you should tick which one you choose. So for the first session, EPR or product passport, and then in the second round on the textile recycling or on the labeling PEF. So please go to the app and tick, because that allows us to understand also in terms of numbers, how many people will be here, how many people will be in the other workshop. After those workshops, we will do a wrapping up. That means I will invite the 4 moderators of those workshops to be here with us and to give a quick, let's say, summary feedback. Because as I said, you can only follow 2 of the 4. So the idea is that we share with all of you also what has happened in the other workshops, and possibly have still a short discussion on that basis. Then after this, hopefully interesting discussions, there will be a short break, and then for all the participants, all the registered participants, you are of course invited to the gala dinner. That will take place at 8 o'clock. There will be buses leaving, specifically for the non-Portuguese. I think the Portuguese will find their way to the Palácio de Bolsa. So for the non-Portuguese, there will be buses leaving here downstairs at 7:30. 7:30. Be ready downstairs to be on the bus, and then it's 15, half an hour ride to the Palacio, where we will enjoy, I'm sure, a wonderful dinner together. Tomorrow, as you may know from the program, we had also offered the possibility for all of you to actually visit some Portuguese companies, and some of you have actually registered for that. If you haven't done so, but you would like, you can still do that. Again, go to the WOVA app and you can still join. So we have 3 different textile companies that are opening their doors to show to you, their production, how they're organized, their business strategy. Should be very interesting. Again, same message. Please go to the WOVA app, and I think most people have not done it yet. You should click which of the 3 companies you would like to visit. And again, this is a matter of logistics. It's also a matter of security, because those 3 companies need to know who is coming into their factory, into their operation. So again, I know not everybody has confirmed, has registered for the Friday program, but if you have, or if you still like to do so, again, go to the app and then indicate which of the 3 companies you will want to join. For those 3 visits, again, there will be buses organized, and I would ask you, again, those that are coming on the tour, to be downstairs at 8:15, so 8:15, giving us enough time to go to those 3, and there will be 3 buses, I believe, so 1 per company. So go, make sure you run the right bus to have the visit. After the 3 visits, the 3 buses will take everybody together again, going to Chiteve, the famous Portuguese textile research center. The Portuguese colleagues, of course, know it very well. That again will be, I think, a very interesting tour experience to see how here in Portugal the research and innovation is very strongly encouraged through Chiteve. So also there we will have an interesting tour explanation, and we will conclude with a lunch at Chiteve. So that is the program for today and tomorrow. I hope you'll find it interesting. And once again, we do encourage you, and I speak on behalf of the speakers also, to actively engage in the discussions. We are here among us, among European textile entrepreneurs. This is really a unique opportunity to be together, to discuss the many challenges, the many changes that we have. So please, don't be afraid, don't be shy, and really participate in the discussions. A last point, social media, visibility, important. And as textile industry, we need to do better on that. If you tweet, if you send out a message, please add the hashtag Porto Convention, so that our media people can pick it up, can share, can spread the news, the message. Because again, collectively, as a European textile industry, I'm personally convinced we need to show better and more all the good things that we are doing, that we are trying to do as an industry. So hashtag Porto Convention when you are tweeting, LinkedIn, any messages, that's important. So this is these are the practical, let's say, informations. I hope everything is clear. If not, of course, during the day, some of my colleagues from ATP, from Eurotex are available. They're really taking pictures, as you can see. Also, Julie, Anna are there to answer any questions if something would not be clear. Good. With that, again, thank you, and I will happily now give the floor to the president of Eurotex for making his opening statements, Alberto Pacanelli.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you all the people that have made this convention possible. It's a big effort as always, but worthy. Ladies and gentlemen, dear members and friends of Eurotex, I would like to welcome all of you to the 2022 Eurotex Convention, which we are co-celebrating with the 24th Textile Industry Forum at ATP. It's a great pleasure to see so many representatives from our industry who decided to come to Porto in these difficult times. So it's very challenging times that we are facing, and to see you here is show commitment to the organization and to the industry. Thank you for being here. But I also see many young people here, many students from Portuguese textile universities. Your presence is equally important, as you are the future of our industry, and it's very important for us that you're here. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of today's event is to discuss the future of the European textile industry. Specifically, we want to discuss with you how we can remain competitive and at the same time be more sustainable. In other words, as in the title here, how do we square the circle between competitiveness and sustainability? The question is even more difficult in today's economic and political situation. As a result of the war in Ukraine, energy prices have reached unprecedented levels, putting an immediate threat on the existence of our industry. Different from the COVID crisis, where the entire global economy was affected, so we were on the same page, this energy crisis is mainly hitting the European industry, which creates a serious disadvantage to our companies. As some of you know, Eurotex has been pleading for a stronger response from the European Union to put a cap on gas prices, to reorganize the electricity market, to offer temporary support to companies. Unfortunately, the response has been so far disappointing, I must say. And the interest from the national interests have been more important than the interest of Europe as a whole. Let's see what is going to happen in the next weeks with the Council and the decision that will be taken. Our short-term priority must be to safeguard the textile industry while preparing them for a long-term competitive future. The future must be built on some strong foundation: innovation, creativity, quality, and sustainability. I know these are just nice words, but I believe we need to continuously invest in innovation. We need to attract creative people in our companies. We need to produce top-class quality products, and we need to become more sustainable. That is the recipe of our success in a globalized and highly competitive market. This requires a new regulatory framework where quality and durability become the norm, where transparency and sustainability is rewarded, where free riders who do not comply with the rules and the standards are kept outside the market. The EU textile strategy aims at creating such a framework. We need to make sure that it will be fair and balanced, and that requires a close and constant dialogue between the regulator and the industry, as we're doing with Eurotex. Creating a new league, a new framework is not enough. As Eurotex, we have asked the European Commission to launch a dedicated program to support our companies in making this green and digital transition. We also are working on a transition pathway which we should set priorities and targets, both for companies and for the authorities at regional, national, and European level. Discussions on this are ongoing in Brussels, and we encourage all textile companies to contribute to this process through the National Textile Association. So go to ATP and have your voice heard. We need your ideas to be the pathway that will eventually strengthen the competitiveness of our industry. A third element, which is crucial in this process, is better cooperation within the textile ecosystem. We can no longer hide in our silos as fiber makers, as spinners, as weavers, fashion makers, or retailers. Authorities nor consumers differentiate between those different segments of our industry. So we need really to create the ecosystem. We are on the same boat, and therefore we need to work together to develop new innovations, to develop a better image for our sector, to develop a better balance of interest and margins within the value chain. As president of Euratex, I would like to reach out to all stakeholders in the textile ecosystem and join forces wherever we can. Coming back to the theme of our convention, we can reconcile competitiveness and sustainability. The answer is difficult, and in my opinion, is clearly yes. But it requires a significant effort from our companies, support from our authorities, and a global level playing field competition. I see many entrepreneurs doing great things already. Here in Portugal, many textile companies have made this transition, and there are great examples for us. So I would like to close these remarks on a positive note. While we face very tough times, I'm optimistic about the future of our European textile industry. The rest of the world is watching us as we move forward in our strategy. We should become their benchmark, and Europe should become a global leader in sustainable textiles. Let's work together, and that is what we aim at Euratex, that will be here to help, support, and defend the common interest. Thank you. And now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce the president of ATP, Mario Jorge Machado, for his welcome remarks. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Alberto to be here with us, and holding this convention is a pleasure for ATP. I'd like also to thank the presence here of several presidents of different associations. So thank you for coming and sharing this space and this Congress with all of us. Dear colleagues and friends, we all know that we are living today difficult times, and we have a lot of uncertainty in our business and in the world. We had the pandemic, now we have a war, and all of this connected with inflation, problems with supply chains, higher costs of energy, costs of raw materials. So we are facing very challenging and difficult times that we need to find, and this is one of the main questions that we are going to discuss here, to find, with the backdrop of the sustainability, how we are going to be able to find solutions for this and world these challenging times. We all know that in this kind of scenarios, some companies will not be able to prevail. So it's going to be difficult times for all of us. But as Alberto mentioned, we have been trying to, with Euratex in Brussels and with ATP and other associations in the different countries, and we have been talking, ATP and ANIVEC, that Cesar is here, we have been talking quite a lot with the Portuguese government, trying to find some support for these times that if we don't give companies some support, and in this situation about the cost of natural gas, Mr. Putin is using this economic weapon in a very effective way, and if the governments do not give support to this economic war, then we are going to have the companies that are using this source of energy, they are going to be hardly hidden and may disappear. And this is going to be a victory for Mr. Putin and this war. And this is something that we are going to fight. And with the support of the governments and support of the European Commission, we should find solutions for this situation. It's not going to be a problem. We also know that we have also a situation that is now today a confrontation between the West and China in this situation, fortunately, just on a commercial and political level. And this is, again, another point of uncertainty in terms of the future. So we have many challenges ahead of us. But the challenge that we are currently facing make a dependence for a huge number of companies and a huge number of workers in Europe. We are around 1.2 million workers in Europe, and so we need to find solutions for the problems that we are facing. Otherwise, we are putting on risk these workers and companies, and with this, with all the know-how, all the tradition that we have built in Europe since many centuries ago, connected to this textile industry. We are doing this convention in Porto in 5 years. It's the second time that we are holding the convention here in Porto. So this is a way, and we are very honored with that, and this is a way also to show how important the Portuguese textile industry has become at European level. And this kind of achievement, it has been done because the Portuguese companies, they have making important bets in terms of developing skills of their workers, the research in the products and process, innovating in how they do their products. So it's the Portuguese companies, we are quite proud of the work that they have been done to transform themselves and to be able to become more sustainable and more circular. And I have to refer also to mention here that this kind of transformation in the European textile industry, it is something that some policymakers and some governments some years ago, they didn't forecast that we'll be here as strong as we are, because as we know, in 2005, when the trade was liberalized, textile was a kind of giving in terms of Europe is going to export technology, and we are going to start importing textiles, and the textile industry is something that was supposed to disappear from Europe. And here we are showing that textile is still very important in Europe. Geopolitics is transforming completely the globalization. We know now that having very extensive supply chains can be a major problem, and governments are now trying to find reshore and reindustrialize Europe, so we have a different world in terms of economics. How this change is going to happen and how this extension of breaking these very long supply chains is going to be changed in the future is something that we are going also to discuss, and the different governments and European industry, They are going to try to find and to help that we can have a European Union that has better results than we have achieved these last 2 decades, because the growth in Europe compared to the other parts of the world has not been so a value that we are proud of it. And as Albert mentioned, and all of you know it, the European Union is about to introduce a broad legislative package based on sustainability. And that situation is also a threat as it is an opportunity. And this is the opportunity that we have to find in this transition from linear to circular in terms of the economy. And this convention, I'm quite confident that we'll find ways in terms of with the ideas and the innovations that we are going to be able to discuss here, and then to continue to find ways to increase our capacity and the way that sustainability is going to become part of our industry and our lives as consumers. But all this must be done with reciprocity, because if we don't guarantee and we don't monitor that these kind of requirements are applied to the other areas of the world that want to sell in Europe, then this will not work. So we need, and this is a must for this transition. What we do here is it's a must that to sell in Europe, the other countries and the other companies outside Europe must comply exactly with the same rules that we are producing in Europe. Because, and I have to, and I believe that this is one of the most important meetings, because our existence is here in stake. So we have to fight hard for this, because otherwise we can be in a very difficult position in some years. And as Albert also mentioned, this convention is held simultaneously with the 23rd Textile Industry Forum. This is normally the Portuguese Textile Forum, where we discuss our Portuguese issues, and where we'll be here discussing the innovation and the energy and the fiscal and economic situation. But as we are now together, and this is a good overlap, so we decided to join and to make our Congress together with the Euratex Congress. Despite the difficulties, like Alberto, I would like also to pass a strongly positive note of confidence in our industry. We know that we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to be more technological. We are oriented to the consumers' demands. And we know sustainability is going to be a major challenge, but is the major opportunity. So we have confidence in the future, and we are going to prevail. Finally, I would like to thank Euratex once again for trusting ATP to hold this convention in this magnificent city of Porto. I hope all of you enjoy Porto. And I also would like to thank the ATP personnel for their hard work, and Euratex personnel for their hard work in organizing this convention. It's not been easy with these times, and with shortage of personnel. I can tell you this, they had some difficult times, but today we'll see that they have done a good job. Thank you very much, and I hope that you can do a good work and make the difference. You are the ones that are going to make the difference. Thank you. Now I'd like to call to the stage Mr. Pedro Cisa Vieira. He is someone that is very knowledgeable in terms of the economy, and he was former Minister of Economy and Digital Transition. He has some important news to give to us, and I hope he can share with us when the war is going to end so we can start working on that scenario. Thank you very much. Please.
So, good morning to you all, and I want to welcome you to Porto and Portugal. It's really a pleasure to have this convention. So the first word is to thank Eurotax for organizing this convention in Porto, and I want to thank ATP for the invitation to be here with you. I have a personal connection to the textiles industry, so it's always a pleasure to get back into these forums and discuss these topics. Now, Alberto and Mario just told me that when we were preparing this discussion, that he would like me to share views about when inflation will start to decrease, where interest rates will be set by next year, and when the war will be over. And I said that I wouldn't be talking about that. And I explained that I am a former Minister of Economy. And I used to compare the role of the Minister of the Economy with the role of the Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance is the CFO of any government. And people always ask them about forecasts for the next few quarters, for next year. Whilst the Minister of Economy is looking into the global capacity of the economy. So we are looking into a broader horizon. So we're concerned about the next few years, the next decade. And that's always very good. So I talk about the long term, and the major advantage of that is that forecasts by ministers of finance are always proven wrong very shortly, whilst the predictions of the ministers of economy are always forgotten when the next decade arrives. So it's much easier to talk about long-term trends, and that's what I'm going to share with you, at least my views. So I am not talking about your industry. You know much better the challenges, the issues, the opportunities that I may have. But I'm going to try to put whatever is happening across your industry into context of major changes. And I will try to tell this story in 3 chapters. So chapter 1 I call The End of the Great Moderation. And the Great Moderation is a term which has been coined by Ben Bernanke, who is a former chairman of the Federal Reserve in the US, and he has been the recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics this year. And in 2005, he said, "We're living the age of the Great Moderation. We've conquered the economic cycle. We live for decades in a context of low inflation, low interest rates, the recessions are short and not very deep, and we've conquered this. We've mastered the economy." 2 years later, we had the great financial crisis. So the Great Moderation was something which was the result of circumstances and of political choices. I'll talk a little bit about that. So after the oil shocks of the 1970s, inflation was fought by central bankers, and it was brought back in the 80s. And during the 80s, other decisions were taken which were important for the environment which we have lived in. We had, after inflation was controlled, we had deregulation of industries and finance sector. we had privatization, we had the lowering of taxation across the Western world. That was the first step. Then we had the end of the Cold War. And the end of the Cold War unlocked a series of very drastic changes in the global economy. The most important of those was that governments could disinvest in defense and security. The second one is that into the world economic order were co-opted major countries, China on the one hand, Russia on the other hand. They started to participate in a global economy. And global political institutions were built to facilitate the free trade of goods and capital across the whole world. Most important of these, the World Trade Organization. So what happened was that a political choice was made to make sure that China and Asia was brought into the world order, and the Western world delegated to China and other Asian countries the manufacturing capacity. We concentrated on design, we concentrated on technology, we concentrated on services, and we concentrated on high technology goods. Otherwise, we delegated production even of certain components and critical materials. And the result of this was that by dislocating production to lower cost countries, we lowered the prices of goods all across the world. And this brought low inflation. And if you have low inflation, you have low interest rates. And that was the secret of the Great Moderation. And this endured, and it had huge success, unleashed economic growth, created new consumer markets in China and other countries around the world. So that was globally very good. But the thing is, it started to accumulate risks and tensions which started to become apparent around a decade ago. And that was being felt most critically in Europe. I sat for a few years at the Competitiveness Council in the European Union. The Competitiveness Council is where ministers of economy sit and discuss topics. And then we have a legislative agenda, but we also have policy discussions. And if I'm getting back to 2017, there was angst in the air. And the angst was felt about three particular topics. The first one was that we were realizing that in Europe, we were lagging behind in critical technologies for the future economy. We felt that the US was very well ahead in digital technologies and tech. China was very well ahead also in tech, but also in telecoms and energy and the like. And we were lagging behind. So this was a problem because the competitiveness of our economy, the capacity we have to remain competitive depends on having a technological edge. And that is what creates value, and that is what allows Europe to support the welfare of all our citizens. We in Europe have a pretty good deal. Probably no one else in the history of mankind has had it so good as European citizens in these days. But that depends on a very competitive economy. If we lack the technology, if we are behind, we are taking technology, we are buying technology from others, we will lose competitiveness. This will be a threat for our way of life. So that was the first concern. The second concern was that we started to realize that we had very critical strategic dependencies on other regions of the globe, that we lacked the main raw materials, we lacked the main critical components in almost all domains of our activities. And this was also a cause for concern. And the third cause for concern was Donald Trump. Donald Trump had been elected in 2016, and he took a number of decisions which left all European leaders very, very anxious. He raised tariffs on imports from the European Union into the United States. He made the WTO stop its activity by not appointing people to their bodies. He even threatened not to comply with the NATO commitments in terms of European defense. Now that was a cause for anxiety. So by the time we were having a new commission in 2019, these topics were very, very high in European leaders' minds and in the agenda of the new von der Leyen Commission. So we started to have discussions, and when we were having these discussions about how we meet these dependencies, we had COVID. And COVID illustrated better than anything the critical risks that we have incurred by relying in overextended supply chains. We realized that a pandemic, a terrorist attack in an harbor, a pirated attack in the Red Sea, a shipwreck in the Suez Canal made the whole Western economy stop. We started to realize that really we must do something about this. And then, of course, we were barely getting out of the COVID crisis, and we got to war in Ukraine. And that was even more specific because it illustrated again the strategic dependencies that we had developed in respect of unreliable partners. Because we are purchasing our energy from a partner who can use this as a weapon to achieve goals which are subverting all the bases of and the foundations of the economic order that we were relying into. So that was very, very difficult. It illustrated all the risks and tensions that have been built. And on the background of this, we have also the growing tension between the United States and China. And Europe was stuck in the middle of this. Europe was always favorable into open borders, open trade. We want to see this. We argued with the United States that the WTO should be reinforced, that this tension between the two major economies in the world is not good for the world. We argued this for quite a long time. China is a very important trade partner for Europe. China is a major investor in Europe. China is a strategic partner in fighting climate change and the like. How can it be that the two major economies are not seeing eye to eye? But the truth is that China is trying to reassert its position and influence in the world. And that is creating some strategic tensions between the two. Now, all these things are putting the great moderation foundations into questions. If the great moderation was the product of globalization, and globalization requires trust between the partners, because we're all sovereign countries. The United States is sovereign, China is sovereign, Russia is sovereign. So we need, if we engage in a manner where the US buys and China sells and produces and Russia provides the energy that keeps flowing things, you need to have trust between the partners. But trust now is eroded. Trust has disappeared. So the globalization which supported this great moderation is no longer there. And something new is arising. So that was chapter 1, the end of the great moderation. So let's go to chapter 2. What is in the making? And I would state that what is in the making is something we don't know exactly how will end. But as the Great Moderation was the result of political choices, whatever is being done, whatever will be the outcome, is also the result of political choices. Those political choices are that governments in the Western world want to reassert the ability to provide for their communities. And if trust is no longer there, they are going to change the rules, and they are going to make that our societies, our economies are more resilient. And a couple of things are going to happen. I think that we will see clearly a greater presence of governments in the next few years in the rebuilding of rules and an intervention in the economy. That will be shown, of course, by a larger investment in defense. We will have a larger investment in defense in the Western world. We will have, certainly, the investment of governments in building resilience in our societies, in our economies. And resilience, in this sense, is making sure that we are prepared to withstand shocks, that we are secure against hazards in the supply chain, against threats from in critical areas. This will always also be an area where we will see this. Governments will finance a lot of this transition, and they will finance what we now call the double transition, the digital transition, and the environmental, the sustainability topic. Just to give you an idea of the order of things, the European Union believes that just in terms of the climate change needs, there will be a need in the European Union of an additional 480 billion investment than what is the current level of investment. So you have to add, on top of what private and public sector invest in Europe, a further 480 billion euros a year until the end of the next decade. So we will be getting more investment in defense, more investment in financing this transition and the technologies that are supporting that, and this will come at a cost. So we will see much more of government. And I don't know exactly what the outcome will be, but I will say that three trends can be seen as very, very strong going forward. The first trend, Alberto talked about it, Mario talked about it, is reindustrialization. Reindustrialization of the US and Europe, particularly Europe, because the US industrially is not the top of the world. But the truth is that we are now hearing about topics such as reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring. We're no longer talking about just-in-time, which required extended supply chains, but just in case. Redundancies in the supply chain, relocating, resourcing whatever we get. These things also will come at a cost. Now, the reindustrialization will take place and is already taking place. In this country, we are already seeing new foreign direct investment flows, which are a direct consequence of this search for friendshoring, nearshoring, and the decisions by companies to say we need to go to other places. We cannot have all our production facilities in China or Asia. We need to go to other places. So this is already happening and will continue to happen. And it will be strongly financed. It will be strongly financed. The US has approved the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Inflation Reduction Act, under this name, is a program which will allocate $730 billion US just to support investment by companies in topics like clean energy, infrastructure, and technologies of the future. The US CHIPS Act is a $52 billion grant program to support investment in factories of chips, microchips, semiconductors in the United States. The largest semiconductor factory will be built by TSMC from Taiwan in the US with a very huge grant from the US government. And Europe, of course, is having its next generation EU program, which was passed on the aftermath of COVID, but which allocated resources to invest mostly in building this famous resilience, but also financing the double digital and green transition. So these are things which are reindustrialization is going to be really a topic. The second topic, which is unavoidable, is energy transition. Energy transition will be here and will require the most of the investment. It will be because we need to reduce CO2 emissions, of course, which currently, the energy we use, we burn carbon and release it into the atmosphere. And the idea is that we need to continue to have energy to support our societies, our economies, but we will do so by not releasing CO2. This is a major transformation. It's going to require huge investment in electricity production by renewables, new infrastructure, new technologies to storage electricity, batteries, etc., etc. Huge public and private investment. Just imagine if we currently go into a highway and people get into a pump station and we have 12 pumps and we spend 2 minutes each car there and we leave. Just imagine what happens if we have electric vehicles. What charging capacity has to be there if we are going to have vehicles which need 15 to 20 minutes to be recharged, to go for an extra 100 kilometers. So this is just the level of investment that we need. On Sines in the south of Portugal, we have a string of new industrial investments, which if they all come into actual delivery, they will need electricity production, which is equal to 50% of the current consumption in this country. So just in a region, the new industrial investments there, if they all happen, we need to deliver 50% plus of electricity than what we currently use in Portugal. So this is the scale of the transformation. But this will happen not only because of climate concerns, but because we realized that if we continue to rely on fossil fuels, we are building a strategic dependency from regions of the globe which we cannot control. And for Europe, I do believe that the energy sufficiency, the reduction of our strategic dependency on energy is the most critical item that we face. The most critical item that we face. Now, just a brief comment. Europe was, in my view, the greatest beneficiary of the world economic order that prevailed after the Second World War. Because we built an export economy. The European Union as a whole is the largest exporting power in the world, more than China. So what happens is that our economy depends on selling goods to the rest of the world. So we cannot just rely on our internal market. The second thing is we don't have the energy and the raw materials. we source this from various places, South America, Africa, Asia, etc. We don't, the United States, we don't have them here. So look at this. So in order to work, we need to sell to the rest of the world, and we need to buy from the rest of the world. Now, if you are on that position, you need to make sure that your trade partners do behave. And the one way to make sure that other partners, which are sovereign countries, behave is if you have defense capacity, if you have the guns. And Europe doesn't have the guns, because the United States always paid for our protection in the last 70 or 80 years. So Europe was very comfortable. And what I think will happen is that in order to meet all these topics, we need to go really, and the most critical one is to become independent, or at least have more alternatives in terms of our energy. So energy transition is going to be a topic. And the third topic is fighting climate change. Building a low-carbon, non-extractive economy. And that is a political choice that Europe has made. The European Green Deal is very, very clear. We will become a carbon-neutral continent by 2050. We will make the most of our effort until 2030. And that will require, and we will do this by making sure that we deploy all the capacity to develop the technologies which will make this possible. These technologies exist already, but they are not industrialized in sufficient quantity. They are not at the price point that we need them. So we will continue to work towards this. And in the European Union, this is going to require not only the investment we talked about in energy transition, but in building a circular economy, which makes sense. If we don't have the raw materials, we should be less dependent upon new materials. So recycling, finding new materials, developing new materials, using technology to develop other man-made materials, artificial materials, going into particles and building things around that, that is going to be clear on the book. And in Europe, this will happen not only by the usual, this will happen with the usual targets. We will provide grants to develop the technologies. We will define targets, 50 or 55. We've all heard about that, which will require by sector, by industry, meeting specific targets to reduce CO2 emissions, and making sure that if we don't meet those targets, we will be penalized. These things are there. And there's the regulatory framework which Europe is developing. And I will give you just 3 examples of this regulatory framework. First, trade policy. Trade policy is going to be much more attentive to how goods which are produced in third markets meet our environmental and social standards. And this was very, very difficult to come to a political decision to do this, because as Mario was saying in his initial presentation, the great moderation bargain was, we will buy your textiles, we will buy your shoes, we will buy your agricultural products, and we will sell you our services, our designs, our financial services, our technology. That was the great bargain. So now we have finally decided that trade policy will meet these challenges. Because if you want reindustrialization, you must make sure of the following. The environmental and social standards to which European producers are subject are a tax that they pay. They cost more to work with those standards than if you don't have those standards. So the European producers are paying that tax. But we are allowing goods from third countries to get into the internal market without paying that tax. So the talk now is about a level playing field in accessing the internal market. And that level playing field will require a series of tools. And all these discussions we had when we defined the new industrial strategy for Europe in 2020, 2021, we took a number of decisions which are now coming into legislation, are coming into the trade agreements which are being negotiated. But on trade policy, it is about auditing and certifying that producers from some countries really do meet these challenges. It talks about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which makes sure that products which do not pay a carbon price in their home countries have to pay a tax to get into the European market. It's about making sure that we don't not only audit, but we enforce, that we have traceability across the value chain to make sure that what is here is meeting our standards. And we have these discussions. We will never be able to enforce this. But we do. We have the technology to do this, and we have the will. And when we have the will, precedents are there that these things work. Just think about GDPR, the General Regulation on Data Protection, which the European Union approved a few years ago. Everyone was saying the Americans will never meet this. The Chinese will never meet this. And they had to. Because if they wanted to access the internal market, the European market, they have to comply. So this is the first thing, trade policy. Another example, the new consumer agenda. The new consumer agenda, which we also approved in 2020, 2021, was very much, a very major concern was the consumers must have the ability to make informed decisions about what they are buying. And because we know that European consumers are concerned about sustainability issues, we want to provide them the information on how the products that they are purchasing are sourced, so that we can align consumer protection with the goals of the European Union and actually make them a tool of pursuing those goals. So we are going to see labeling, we are going to see much more information about how and where the products are sourced. And the third thing is the financial system. The ESG framework, which is coming into regulation, is massive. It's about companies having to disclose their environmental, social, and government standards in their reporting. So the companies have to present financial reports. Some companies, large companies, have to present non-financial reports. This is going to be enlarged to much more companies, and they will have to disclose how they meet ESG standards across all their suppliers. And the financial system is also going to be there. Asset managers will have to make sure that their portfolio of investments meets certain targets. Banks will have to report how their credit is not only meet certain risks in terms of sustainability, but also where they are meeting their aligned with European Green Deal goals. So just imagine that you are a publicly traded company in some sector, I don't know, luxury or clothing, and you're a publicly traded company. You will have to disclose how you source your products. You will have the asset managers, the fund managers who buy your actions are going to have to report how in their portfolio the things are met. And if a company does not meet these standards, probably they will not, and that will cause, they will not invest, that will cause the shares to drop. So all these things, if you align them all, are going to push things into a certain direction. So we don't know what the new global order will be, but we know that reindustrialization, energy transition, sustainability, and building a low-carbon, non-extractive economy is going to be a priority for Europe and the European governments in the next few years. So my third chapter is about what I think this will mean for industry at large and for your sector in particular. Now, many of these changes are going to require so much disruption, so much new things, so much new technology, that it's very hard to even imagine that this can be possible in less than a decade. The thing is, because we are aligning regulation, trade policy, subsidies, taxation, and financing with these goals, I think what we are going to see is that the investment in these new technologies will happen at a much faster pace, and that the cost of these new technologies will go down very fast. And just imagine two things. In less than a decade, photovoltaic electricity price has declined by 90%. 90%. It was an emerging technology just a decade ago, and now it is the cheapest source of electricity that you can have. In Portugal, we have the lowest cost of PV electricity in the world. Of course, we have a lot of sun. Probably that's not the same in Germany or something, but in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy, in Greece, these things are true, which actually is very good, because if we can have cheap energy, that's where all the industry wants to be. That's by the way. So that's if you look at this precedent, you see how if you add sufficient demand, if you fix targets which are demanding, then the investment will be there, industrialization will happen, costs will go down. And if you now compare what is happening with the costs of electricity, the costs of natural gas, you are seeing the incentives that you all are having into seeking self-production of electricity to make sure that your costs go down. The investment now compensates. You are probably buying biomass capacity to produce energy because it now makes sense, economic sense. So all these things, all this push will bring down costs. That is at least the expectation. How fast will this happen is going very much to depend on all these conditions being there. And what this means for your industry is, I believe, a great opportunity. Because, to be honest, this is going to impact all industry in Europe. This is going to bring in new industrial producers into Europe. But you have an advantage. And the advantage that you have is that you have been submitted to the largest stress test that any sector in Europe has had. Because you had the most severe competition shock from one day to the other just 15 years ago. So the ones amongst you that have survived are already well ahead in terms of seeking to be more efficient, going into more value added, working with incorporating knowledge and technology in what you are doing. So all these car manufacturers in Germany, all these chemical producers across Europe are going to this same sort of shock, and they are completely in panic. But you have been there already. So I think you're well prepared. And also, whilst 15 years ago, the great bargain was we will buy textiles from China, now the new industrial strategy has defined 14 critical strategic industrial ecosystems in Europe, and textiles and garments is there. And Eurotex is working with the European Commission in making sure that the framework is adapted to the challenges that actually meet the major goals of the European Union, the major goals of mankind going forward, which is a low-carbon, non-extractive activity. So I am completely, well, I'm confident about your future. We have to navigate these very difficult seas in the next few months, and you all have to survive. You all have to rely on governments and others to allow you to go through this bumpy road. But these are trends which ultimately will work in your favor. Consumer preferences are there. If we look at the consumer spend, you see that millennials and the Generation Z is already there, but they will grow. And the concerns for sustainability in this, particularly Generation Z, is much stronger. So you have now a part of the market which is already concerned about sustainability issues. This will grow. So you have consumer preference from one side, you have regulation on the other side. These things all should make sense. And basically, you're in the oldest industry that mankind has discovered. Ever since we started to use a garment made of fur, and we discovered how to weave some vegetables or animal fabrics, we have been living with what you do forever. And we will continue as long as we are humans. So in Europe, you have shown that you can adapt, that you can change, and I'm sure that ultimately the winds are there to favor you. So all the best for your future work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vieira, for I think for sharing a very comprehensive, inspiring global picture about what has happened and what is coming, and for bringing that message of confidence and trust towards the textile industry. I suggest that we do allow for a few questions. I mean, there's so much to discuss, there's so much to reflect upon what has been said. But I will maybe allow for a few questions if people would like to comment, challenge maybe what has been said before we go for a coffee break. So who would like to, take the floor, raise a point? Alberto, please.
I break the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Vieira. Very interesting. Two elements that you haven't touched, which I think are quite important. One is demographics, and the other one is nuclear power. What is the feeling you have? Thanks.
Well, nuclear power. It's if you look at the energy transition, it all becomes much more difficult if you rule out nuclear. I don't know if nuclear is for all. I think new technologies are there. Nuclear has the advantage that it can allow to produce electricity without burning fossil fuels and releasing CO2. But it's a very controversial topic. I think that the US are going definitely to build more nuclear capacity. They're going to new generation reactors, smaller in size. They are probably thinking that this will reduce risk. It's very difficult in Europe. It's particularly difficult in Germany. And as I have heard, the problem with nuclear is not about the CO2. It's a very clean energy from that point of view. The problem is that nuclear waste is going to be there creating risk for 100,000 years. And that's more than the Homo sapiens has in Earth. So you cannot even start to realize what risks you will be accumulating for the future. So I think it's not settled the question. I think it's possible that we remain to have nuclear capacity in Europe. I'm pretty sure that France wants to have that, the Nordics may, but it's not very clear for me what the share of nuclear electricity will be in the future mix of Europe. So that's nuclear. Demographics is it's a very controversial topic. I think that it's going to happen, that the world population is going to decline in a few years' time. It's already happening in China. It has happened for decades in Japan. Just a note. In Japan, you have more diapers sold each year for older people than for babies. So that shows you how the thing is. So I think that if you look into what is happening, I believe two things will have to happen very clearly in Europe. This also has an economic effect because older people spend less than younger people, so that's also a problem. I think two things will have to happen because we cannot think that people will get back to having babies at the pace that they had in the 1960s. That's not going to happen. It's not happening anywhere in the world. So two things are going to be needed. One is automation. And by the way, you can only have industry back in Europe, which is competitive, if you're not going to work as you did in the 1990s or 1980s. You're going to have automation. And that's the only way to bring it down costs because salaries in Europe are going to be very high. So you have to be much more efficient. And one of the mazes is automation. And the second is, and this is unavoidable, immigration. It's unavoidable. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but my mother is now dependent. The people who take care of her, and by the way, of tens of thousands of older people in this country, they all speak Portuguese with a funny accent. If you go to a restaurant or an hotel in London or Paris or elsewhere, you see people who are not natives. Because we still have children, and we will continue to have a growing number of children all around the world. They're just in disparate places. And we should manage this. That's my point. Currently, around Europe, around the Western world, people feel threatened by immigration, and we are just pushing them back, and we don't want them to disrupt the way we live. But the truth is, we should be actually managing these flows. Because one of the impacts of climate change is that life is going to be unbearable in many regions of the world where a lot of population live. In 2021, for the first time in history, more refugees have been displaced because of climate issues than because of war and violence. And as climate change makes it impossible to grow crops in Africa or others, people will try to move. And if we don't manage those movements, they will come and will be much more difficult to. So I think we need more people, and we should work to integrate these people because we lack them, rather than trying to push them back. It's like holding the wind with your hands. That's...
Thank you. One more question there, and then...
Thank you. This is Lucy Shea of Futera. I would love to pick up on the double transformation point around sustainability and digital, and firstly around sustainability around consumer behaviour change. It strikes me that other areas are actually now catching up with the EU a little bit. So the latest IPCC report, Annual Report 6, looked for the first time really at demand side mitigation and how in the way that what we wear, how we live, we work, how we play, can reduce climate change, greenhouse gas emissions by 5%. And I wondered if there's anything coming down the line in Portugal or in the EU around help, support, guidance, further to what you have already, around how companies can help their consumers change their behaviour, support them in a way that would lead to a sustainable lifestyle. And then the second one is around the digital piece and Web3, which obviously is the huge revolution we have going on now from Web 2 to Web 3. There's a real potential for over and above circular economies to be dematerialised and for value chains to be dematerialised. So potential huge impact for sustainability there. And I wondered again, is there anything over and above what you've said that will support, help guide around the transformation to Web 3?
Yes, thank you. Two very good points. I think that on the first topic, clearly you have a commercial case to go sustainable. Because I don't know what your experience is, but the new generations are really demanding in terms of the impact we make on the planet. And they want to make sure that they have an impact on the way they save, the way they invest, the way they purchase. They want to contribute through that. And this is a market that is growing. So there's a commercial case to go sustainable, and some companies are already having these concerns and are developing not only concerns around the whole supply chain, but also making sure that they can illustrate that, make it more clear to the consumer. That is having an impact. What I am saying is that in the European Union, we are reinforcing that through regulation. The new consumer agenda is going to be developed in the number of legislation which will have impact on labeling. It will have impact on traceability through the, getting some sort of digital recommendation which explains you how the product was sourced. All this will reinforce the need to invest, and as we know, as you go in a certain direction, you invest, you bring costs down, you make suddenly this whole thing is there. I was reading a piece the other day about how changes to MiFID, which is the directive about investment in financial products, is now requiring that asset managers illustrate to the investors, to the retail investors, you and me, when we invest, we buy a unit in a fund or something, what the actual sourcing of the investments you are making, what the impact in terms of environment is. And the way they were seeing is that this is going to bring down the cost of capital for sustainable products, and it's going to increase it for others. Ultimately, this will change the landscape. So I think these things are reinforcing itself. The other is much obvious. Clearly, to go into a fully circular economy, you need much more going into digitalization of industrial processes in making sure that you are using, and we have now the capacity to do that, and we are going to deploy it at a faster rate. It's very obvious for me that sustainability and digitalization will reinforce each other, and probably will only be, a fully circular economy will only be possible if we really use all these things, Internet of Things, 5G, 6G, telecoms, data analytics, and large-scale computing capacity to make sure that this all matches, and that's how it becomes possible to trace how your products are sourced and the like.
Thank you. Any final question, maybe, before we wrap it up? Frederick, please. And maybe just introduce yourself, Frederick. So.
Yeah, my name is Frederick Van Hout from CERF's European Man-Made Fibers Association, so representing the synthetic and cellulosic fiber industry. You spoke about reindustrialization. Now, we have an issue of a global, imperfect playing field.
Yep.
And when you see that countries abroad are continuing to subsidize their industry, subsidize their exports, how can we go for a proper industrialization in Europe when we don't have that level playing field, so to say? Thank you.
Well, level playing field is an expression which is now completely in the corridors of Berlaymont. And that's a major change too in respect to what happened 5 or 6 years ago. It's driving change in trade policy, I talked about that, but it's also driving change, for instance, in competition policy. The European Union is probably the most liberal economy in the world. And what you now see is that competition policy is now allowing, at a greater scale, subsidizing innovation and new technologies by governments and the European Union, supporting companies developing that. But on the other hand, it's also creating a new regulation on merger control to allow the European Commission to have a screening power when a third country company buys a European company, for instance, and looking into how this company is supported in terms of its cost, access to capital, cost of capital, etc., to see if that company, which has capital to purchase a European company, is on a level playing field with all other European competitors. Now, it's a very tricky political situation because people were saying, we are interested in open trade, and this can be viewed as protectionist measures. We don't like the expression strategic autonomy because it can suggest that we are trying to close our market. But ultimately, the decision is, no, we're going for open strategic autonomy. We want to allow the access to the internal market of our trade partners, but they have to comply with the rules. Now, this is going to take time, and it's not going to be immediate, but the trend is there, and that's my point.
Thank you. I suggest we close here. There's a lot of food for thought, and once again, thank you. I think Mario Jorge and Alberto maybe come on stage to share a small gift to express our gratitude to Mr. Vieira.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Sustainable fashion from Portugal. That's the trend. That's the buzzword. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you again. And so, now we go for a coffee break, well deserved, and we will resume, as I said, with the CEO panels at 11 o'clock in this same room. Thank you.